On today's Locked On Thunder podcast, let's continue to preview the New Orleans Pelicans series with a crossover. Locked On Pelicans joins the show.
You are Locked On Thunder, your daily Oklahoma City Thunder podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Let's get it going on the Locked On Thunder podcast, on the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day. On today's show, Jake Madison, Locked On Pelicans, joins us to preview the first round. Everything you need to know about the Thunder, about the Pelicans, and about this series is about to go down. Make sure you follow him on Twitter at NOLA Jake. Follow me on Twitter at Rylan_Stiles, the 8th pod of the week, and you're going to get a bonus 10-minute pod before game one talking about keys to the game. I appreciate everyone who's listened to us this entire week and stuck with this pod. Even a lot of you have listened to this podcast since the rebuild began and 20-win seasons. Now it's here. Game one, baby. It's here. Excited for it. We'll recap game one afterwards as well. But thank you again. Subscribe to anywhere you get your podcast for free, including on YouTube. And now let's get you out to the Locked On Podcast crossover with NOLA Jake and myself talking about this series.
Welcome to a crossover edition of Locked On Pelicans, Locked On Thunder. I'm Jake Madison, host of the Locked On Pelicans podcast at NOLA Jake on Twitter. He is Rylan Stiles at Rylan_Stiles, host of Locked On Thunder. Rylan, these are fun to do with the Locked On Network here. I'm excited to have you on, and I know I'm excited to be on your show here. We got a 1 versus 8 matchup.
These are always fun to do. It's exciting to get to talk to you and talk about this series.
Yeah, look, this is the type of coverage you can only get as part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The local hosts giving you the insight that you want. No one else is coming to you like this, so please subscribe to Locked On Pelicans, Locked On Thunder. Follow along on YouTube as well and become an everydayer, and that means you're listening Monday through Friday. Let us know in the comments down below. Are you an everydayer of Locked On Thunder, an everydayer of Locked On Pelicans? And of course, today's crossover episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I've got a competitive side. I'm a big fan of Monopoly Go, the hit mobile twist on classic Monopoly. So join your friends, download Monopoly Go now free on the App Store or Google Play. Okay, Rylan, number 1 seed Oklahoma City Thunder. That couldn't have been your expectation going into this season, right?
Yeah, I don't think anyone expected the 1 seed. I think that you were hoping that this Thunder team that made some noise late last year, maybe they can, in a tough Western Conference, get top 6 and clear the play-in tournament. That would have been a wild success. And then, as the preseason got started, you thought, well, maybe as a young team, they'll take the regular season more seriously. Maybe they can model themselves after the Kings and get like a home court advantage in round 1. But nobody thought it would be the first seed in the West with 57 wins.
No. So what got them there? What was the driving force behind that?
I think that it's Shai taking another leap. In the last 3 years, we've been talking about how, okay, this is probably the best that Shai gets. It was first an all-star caliber player. Then it was an all-NBA guy. Now it's a guy that should win MVP. I don't think he will, but I think that he should win MVP this season. And then with J-Dub, the leap from year 1 to year 2, where he was already an efficient scorer, already a good defender in year 1. Now he's an excellent, versatile defender and one of the best shot makers, especially in the fourth quarter, that you're going to find, especially for a young player like J-Dub. So you have 2 now guys that you can turn to initiate offense in the clutch and whenever you need to go get a bucket to alleviate some pressure off of Shai. And then you just have to mention Chet Holmgren, because he actually provides rim protection that the Thunder did not have. I mean, they had Jalen Williams last year, Jay Will taking charges and being on the ground, but having a guy who can erase shots and not just get the raw block numbers, but actually deter you from going inside is big whenever you couple that with the amount of perimeter defenders the Thunder have. Lou Dort, one of the best in basketball. Shai is one of the best two-way players in basketball. He's like one of the only superstars that has the motor to play defense at a high clip and be an initiator offensively. And we talked about J-Dub as well.
So when you look at this team, like how do they win? How do they win this series? What makes them kind of go, other than Shai just being awesome? Because I agree with you there. Like, he's going to get serious MVP consideration this year.
Yeah. So Shai's obviously going to be the main point, but they're one of the best 3-point shooting teams, one of the best defending teams in the NBA. I think this series comes down to, guys like Isaiah Joe hitting their shots, a rookie like Cason Wallace continuing to knock down corner threes at a massive clip, the big stretch from Lou Dort this season with improved efficiency, like all that stuff is going to matter. And I think that when you're looking at this series, one of the biggest questions isn't going to be inexperience or rebounding, which is what the national media tends to lean on. I think it's going to be, can the Thunder continue to create havoc and create turnovers? They turn you over a ton in the playoffs as the game slows down, as the game goes to half court. Oftentimes you see those sloppy turnovers get cut down. The teams are obviously better once you get to the postseason as well. So can you continue to generate steals, which puts you on the fast break? We see less fast breaks in the playoffs. That's an area the Thunder have dominated. I think that they can still do it just because of their sheer length, but they're going to have to prove it on Sunday and throughout the postseason.
Yeah, you mentioned the experience, right? And is that something you're actually worried about? I think people are looking for a reason to kind of discredit just a young, unproven OKC team. But Shai has been in the playoffs twice before. Like, there's some playoff experience there, maybe not up and down the roster, but your lead guy he has more playoff games than Brandon Ingram has, right? And I think people consider Brandon Ingram like a more experienced player, and that would be incorrect.
Yeah, I think that it's just an easy thing for the national media to lean on and for people who haven't watched this team to lean on. Aside from that, I think that we can't pick and choose which parts of NBA history that we should agree with. Like, historically, yes, young teams have not gone far, but historically, young teams also don't win 57 games in the toughest conference. Historically, young teams are not top 5 offense, top 5 defense. Historically, young teams don't have an MVP caliber guy. Historically, top 5 teams, young teams don't have a coach of the year candidate. Historically, like, young teams just are not this. So, like, they have way more history on their side in terms of like a star-driven league that needs to play defense to win. They do both those things. And so like that should matter as well in the postseason equation. I think that with the inexperience thing, you also look at their uncommon maturity in the regular season. They only suffered one 3-game losing streak, and that was a 3-game stint where they did not have either one of Shai and J-Dub. And if you take the top 2 guys off any team, they're not going to be as good as they were before. So 1 3-game.
Yeah, I've seen that here a bunch, by the way.
Like that's not anything to be concerned about. And you look at how they've responded to adversity. Going back to November 1st against New Orleans on national television, when they blew a 20-point lead in the Paycom Center, they struggled to close games in that first month. Since then, they obviously have not, as they got to 57 wins in the number 1 seed in the toughest Western Conference we've seen. So we can't spend all preseason and all regular season saying this Western Conference is going to be impossible. It's going to be decided by 1 game. Like, you're going to have to be really good to get in the playoffs, and then also discredit the team that gets number 1 and almost wins 60 games in the tough Western Conference.
Yeah, when I look at this series, like the argument of like, oh, they're inexperienced, so a team can surprise them. It's like, no, this Thunder team is really good, and they've seemed to have the Pelicans number this season. There's a reason they're favored going into this, and most people are picking the Thunder in 5 or 6. And I think when you objectively look at it, that's not an incorrect thing to do. You know, you mentioned the turnovers that they force on defense. The Pelicans like to do a very similar thing. They want to turn defense into fast break, easy offense, because at times they struggle a little bit in the half court. But OKC really good in the half court too. And one of the things I've noticed about them watching them is for a young and inexperienced team doesn't turn the ball over. And that speaks to kind of some of the maturity and level of play, right?
Yeah, I think that this young team, like you look at Shai, it starts at the top every time. He's a guy that has high usage and leads the offense. He turns the ball over like 2 times a game. For as much usage as he has, that's incredible. Then you trickle down to the guys like J-Dub, who when Shai's off the court, he's asked to be the kind of Shai light. He doesn't turn the ball over a ton. Like, none of these guys are high turnover guys. And so as a team, it cuts down on turnovers. They do not make mistakes, which is impressive considering that their offense is entirely based around cutting and movement. So just a slight miscommunication for a team that, if you want to go back to inexperience, has not racked up a ton of games together, but they've gelled extremely quickly in that aspect to not turn the ball over a ton. Like, it matters. And I think that the Thunder, if it's going to get down to play style, they have a very adaptive roster, which I don't think gets credit for. As you mentioned, they're fantastic in transition. They're fantastic in the half court. They can throw out a little bit of a bigger lineup with J. Will and Chet that's worked really well if they need to. They can also play extremely small with a guy like Kenrich Williams at the 5. They can do multiple different things to kind of counter and match whatever the opposition is doing. So you've got to feel good about this Thunder team if you're heading into the postseason.
So you mentioned some of the depth, and this is the last thing I'll ask you here before we go into the next bit here on the crossover episode of Locked On Pelicans, Locked On Thunder, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The Pelicans have gotten their wins, 49 wins in the regular season. It's a good team here, but a lot of it has come from their depth and their bench, and guys like Jose Alvarado, Najee Marshall, who were the heroes in that, second playing game win over the Sacramento Kings. How do you feel about the depth for a team like the Thunder?
Yeah, I think that the depth is going to be important for both teams this series and for whoever advances, because a lot of times in the playoffs, we discredit depth, but I think both teams have the depth to, like we mentioned before, match styles. Like the Thunder have 10 guys that you feel confident can play in the postseason. A guy like Casey Wallace, a guy like Aaron Wiggins, a guy like Kenrich Williams. You can go down the list, but you can deploy them in specific matchups. So, for example, if the Kings were to advance and you were playing this bigger team and having to deal with Sabonis, I think that you would have seen a lot more of Jay, Will, and Chet playing together than you'll see against New Orleans. For the Pelicans, they have an opportunity to either lean into playing Valanciunas like they have not done to this point, or match.
We'll get into that in a minute because I want to talk more about that, because I find that either way, I don't know how it's going to go yet, but that's a talking point for later. Don't you worry.
I think that's going to lead off the next segment, or they can kind of play smaller with what we saw Nance do on Friday was play exceptionally at the small ball 5. They're going to need a small ball counter to OKC, but if you get into the small ball game, the Thunder can play even smaller and better small ball because they've played it more than most teams in the NBA. So I think that their depth is key. And on the last point for depth, whenever you go into this series with having the star power, I feel very confident that they're going to have one of or two of Isaiah Joe, Aaron Wiggins, Kenrich Williams have a big shooting night. And if one or two of those guys have a big shooting night with Shai star power, you're going to win that game.
Yeah, sometimes it's those role players, right? Like that are really going to make the difference in a series. We'll get into kind of some X factors, difference makers. That's going to be coming up. We'll talk a little Pelicans in the next segment as well. That's coming up here next in a crossover episode of Locked On Pelicans, Locked On Thunder. Today's crossover episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. Sometimes we all need the opportunity to get something off of our chest. Big or small, certain things can really start to get to you, and it's important to let that out, especially to someone who's unbiased in your life. So today I want to say how I really feel about something. If you're a Pelicans fan, you probably are going to agree with me on this. I kind of hate the replay review rules in the NBA. They make a call, you challenge it, but then they can make another call. And I get that it's technically getting it right, but something just seems weird. And we saw this as the Pelicans took on the Sacramento Kings in that second play-in game. So therapy can be different for everyone. And most of us have bigger problems than our favorite sports teams, but it's important to get things off your chest every once in a while. So if you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA and get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. And thank you for making Locked On Thunder, Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We got the crossover episode here. He's Rylan Stiles, host of Locked On Thunder. I'm Jake Madison, host of Locked On Pelicans, getting you set for the 1-8 matchup like you can only get this kind of coverage on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day here. Rylan, which team did you want to see in the first round? If the Thunder were waiting at home and it was the Kings of the Pelicans, which one did you want?
It's not going to be very endearing to your audience, but I did want the Pelicans just by the simple nature of like the Zion injury. Like that was very scary. Coming out of Tuesday, Brandon Ingram looked kind of shaky. CJ McCollum, I think, is a pick and roll target that can be played off the floor, especially for the Thunder, who like their initiators are bigger than your average guards. CJ McCollum is smaller than your average guard. And then you have Chet Holmgren laying the screens and picking and popping or picking and rolling that you have to deal with. So for those aspects, it was looking good for New Orleans in this matchup for Oklahoma City. Yeah, my audience is going to hate you. I mean, so when you look at this Pelicans team, what worries you? I think that what worries me is Brandon Ingram. I think it's going to continue to get better. Like you saw it on Friday, he got better from where he was on Tuesday. He'll be better Sunday than he was on Friday. And as he gets better and becomes that top player that he is, like all you need at that point is a turn back the clock Valanciunas game once, a Trey Murphy massive 3-game once where he splashes in 7 threes, and a CJ McCollum, comeback tour. And you've won a couple of games, and now all of a sudden it's a series, and now all of a sudden, you're playing in New Orleans, you're on Bourbon Street, and you're trying to win a series late. So like, I think that the Pelicans have a chance to really make a statement and steal this game if they can get Trey Murphy 3 games or like a Najee Marshall game. Like, all they need is a couple of these role players to really step up. And Trey Murphy is the guy I'm extremely worried about, as you can tell, as a guy who's had like 11 5+ three-pointer nights and 1 10 three-pointer night. That can easily happen Sunday or any other game this series.
Yeah, right. Like, 3-point shooting is often the great equalizer on this sort of thing. And the Pelicans have done a really good job of not taking it in large volume, let's say, but making their shots. And they have guys that can get really, really hot. Like CJ McCollum shot in the regular season over 70% from 3 against the Sacramento Kings. Like, that's a guy that's capable of going off. You mentioned Trey Murphy's been able to do it. Herb Jones hasn't been shooting as much recently, but he has been really good from the corners especially. And while I know OKC does a really good job of making their threes, they're the best 3-point shooting team in the league in terms of percentage, New Orleans is one of the tops when it comes to kind of contesting out on the 3-point line. So if you force some of those role players to have a bit of an off night and not, I don't think it's really going to affect spacing for a guy like Shai who's going to attack and drive. But if you force them to have an off night and New Orleans makes their shots, that's something that can swing a game or two potentially in a series like this.
That's the biggest fear for Thunder fans. Number one, Herb Jones is the best defender on Shai. Obviously, Shai's going to be a great scorer, but he's the best defender in the NBA on Shai, which makes him one of the best defenders in the NBA, period, if you can stop Shai. And then you have Brandon Ingram, who's a guy that can go get you a bucket. So what you're looking at is a Pelicans team who can defend when they're locked in with their length and size, who can shoot threes whenever the Thunder are susceptible to giving up corner threes because of the way that they rotate and collapse in the paint. And then you have a guy like Brandon Ingram who can go kind of knock down shots, and you have the rebounding advantage if you can play Valanciunas still in this game. And you just have the formula to win games. It's going to be the shot variant. So you shoot better than the Thunder, then you have the ability to do the rest that you need to do. If you're going to outperform a top seed, you got to shoot better than them, you got to defend them, and you got to have a late score. And the Pelicans have all those things.
So let me ask you, because it relates to the 3-point shooting and CJ McCollum in particular. Like, what's the style of defense that the Thunder play? Do they switch? Are they running drop coverage? Are they doing something else?
Yeah, the Thunder are going to just switch everything for the most part, because that's their entire goal in this whole rebuild draft process, is having people that can switch 1 through 5 defensively. Even Chet Holmgren can play on an island. Like, he did that against New Orleans this season as well. He can play on an island because he can play off of you a little bit to give you space to not just blow past him. If you do get past him, he has to link to recover. So switching 1 through 5 is a big deal. And it also works offensively, where their whole goal has been drafting guys who can grab a rebound and go. So you're not looking for the point guard. You're not stopping your offense. So it's versatility on both ends, especially defensively. The thing where you can capitalize on the Thunder is they are willing to give up corner threes. And Mark's talked about how, look, this is the NBA. Like, the scoring is a premium in this modern era. You have to give something up. They're choosing to give up corner threes at times because they're having to collapse in the paint and make up for their size, and then rely on their athleticism to spray out to the corners. You get a quick release, though, it's tough to spray out in the corners no matter how athletic you are. And so that can lead to some open corner threes where the Pelicans are really good. But that's going to be the style. It's just switching everything, because you look at a guy like Brandon Ingram, in terms of just pure size, you like having Dort up under him. And then lengthwise, you like having Shai and J-Dub. So whoever you want to switch on to Brandon Ingram, like, the Thunder are going to be okay with it. And they're going to be willing to just, go through the process of staying matched up in the pick and roll and stuff like that.
Yeah, what you've seen recently is CJ thrives, like a guy like CJ McCollum, who can be a big difference maker if he has kind of one of those 30-point games that he can do. And he was playing until these past couple of games really well to end the season. He feasts on drop coverage. You sag a big man back off of him, give him a little bit of space in a pick and roll situation, and he's just going to shoot right over. And that starts to pull guys out of the paint, which is going to open things up for Brandon Ingram to get a little bit more aggressive and then drive down. It would be the case for Zion Williamson if he was playing. He will be reevaluated, by the way, for everyone listening, maybe around game 5 if it gets to that point. It's still very unlikely you see him in a series, but there is a bit of an outside chance that he could make a return late in this one, but not something to really count on with that. But if the Thunder are going to switch everything, and that's what the Pelicans do, they're going to switch absolutely everything here. You'll see them do a lot of pre-switching so that they can make sure they get Herb Jones on Shai right off the bat when a pick comes or a screen comes as well. It could limit CJ McCollum, and he's had moments where he basically no-shows. So finding the way he's going to play, and we'll talk more about that coming up in the next segment here. You mentioned Chet Holmgren, and I'm really curious your thoughts, and I'll share mine here too, on kind of the Jonas Valanciunas, Larry Nance Jr. battle with him and what New Orleans is going to do. Let me put it to you this way. If the Pelicans try and run their offense through JV, if they try and post him up against Chet Holmgren, and look, Chet's skinny, he's not as big as, he's big, he's not as strong, let's say, as Valanciunas is that a win for the Thunder? Is that something that concerns you if they try and post him up a lot?
Yeah, so I think, though, with Valanciunas, it goes back to our crossover in the play-in last year. If you want to utilize Valanciunas...
That was so long ago.
That was so long ago.
Feels like years, man.
If you want to utilize Valanciunas as this guy who you dumped the ball into, I think that the Thunder would be willing to give that up because Chet's going to get a couple blocks, even if he gives up buckets. He'll get a couple blocks and like in the possession. And so it's like you're bunting in baseball at that point. You're taking the ball out of McCollum's hands, taking the ball out of Brandon Ingram's hands. You're not spraying the ball out to Trey Murphy, who I'm deathly afraid of. You're not letting Herb Jones shoot threes. Like, go ahead and take your twos. We'll rely on SGA. We'll rely on Jada. We'll rely on Isaiah Joe to outscore Valanciunas every day of the week. Because on the other end, if we're going to keep Valanciunas on the floor, he cannot possibly guard Chet Holmgren on the perimeter. He just cannot do it. And so if Josh Giddey, who's played exceptionally well in New Orleans, forces you to guard him, what are you going to do with Valanciunas on the court?
No, I'm with you, right? Like the center position is a problem for New Orleans. And when I was looking ahead to playoff matchups, you wanted a team like the Clippers or even the Timberwolves where like the center position isn't really a concern for you. But going into this matchup, like it is, right? Jonas Valanciunas can't defend Chet on the perimeter. If they want to post him up, he can score a couple of times over Chet, but I don't think he's going to have a crazy efficient game that wins it for you. And if you're doing that, as you said, right, there's no ball movement. That just slows the pace down. It kills you. You're not moving the ball around till you find an open 3-point shooter or something like that. And that's a way that this team loses, right? They started to do that against the Sacramento Kings and it didn't work. And once they just kind of used Jonas almost like passively a little bit in the flow and the rhythm of the offense is when his game really came together rather than force feeding him. But if he doesn't work, then you run with Larry Nance Jr. out there who, yes, can switch on the perimeter and at least defend Chet out there. But there's a huge size advantage for Chet there where he can probably just shoot over him and probably out-rebound him. And this is an area that I think is a big concern for New Orleans. So maybe it's just they go play really small. You've seen Najee Marshall at the 5. You've seen Dyson Daniels at the 5 a little bit too. And I wonder if that's something that they just really might try look at doing and see if they can just kind of like athleticism the Oklahoma City Thunder here, but that's easier said than done. And I don't know how well that's going to kind of work in theory when it comes to this. But I just don't think the answer is going to be running through Jonas Valanciunas. If they double, that's the difference, right? You've seen a couple teams double Jonas Valanciunas, and if teams do that, then the Pelicans can move the ball around, and that's how you beat teams. But there's no way with Chet that you're going to see OKC doubling Jonas Valanciunas down low.
Yeah, I don't think that'll be the case at all. And I think that when you look at this matchup, it goes back to the play in last year whenever they didn't have Chet. And I thought Valanciunas played really well in the first half, but he still could not stay on the floor against J. Will, who's a 6'9", 6'10" center. And it still was not enough of an advantage for him to be on the floor because of how athletic the Thunder are. You're going to have to match their athleticism. And I don't think that Valanciunas can do that because if you're going to play through him, he'll miss a couple bunnies as he did on Friday. And Chet will deter a couple shots. And then you're left with a couple of nice lefty hooks down on the low block. And so be it at that point.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the situation that OKC would love in this. So let's talk a little more Pelicans in the next segment. I want to get into some of the X factors too, players we expect that are going to make a difference at some point in this series. That's coming up here next in a crossover episode of Locked On Thunder, Locked On Pelicans here on both of our channels and the Locked On Podcast Network. I always say your team every day here. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans, Locked On Thunder is brought to you by Monopoly Go. We've all been there, either as a player or a fan. It's halftime and the scoreboard is not looking good. So you're feeling low. You're not sure if your team can pull out a win. That's when you dig deep, lift your head up and say to yourself, it's time to get back in the game and pull off some bank heists and take as much of my friends' money as I possibly can. That's right. The smash hit mobile game Monopoly Go lets you compete with your friends to get the most riches and the biggest empire. It's the Monopoly you love, but on your phone anytime with tons of new twists, including leaderboards to compare your progress to your buddies. There's so much to do. You play on countless dynamic Monopoly boards, make your friends bankrupt by smashing their landmarks with a wrecking ball, and you get to charge other players for rent on your iconic properties. You can even work with your friends to crack open community chests and in tournaments to get extra rewards and climb the leaderboard. So get back out there, put on your game face, download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store and Google Play. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans, Locked On Thunder your first listen today and every day. We are giving you the coverage you're not going to get anywhere else as we get you set for the 1 versus 8 matchup in the Western Conference. It's going to be a fun series. Make sure you are subscribed to your favorite team's podcast and join the community on YouTube as well. He is Rylan Stiles, host of Locked On Thunder. I'm Jake Madison, host of Locked On Pelicans here. So, in this series, right, like the Pelicans are going in with a big disadvantage. If Zion was playing, I think that would definitely be a different thing here. How is Mark Daigneault done a good job of like these kind of quicker turnarounds and game planning for opponents? I think you're seeing some of that in the NBA, whether it's you play 2 games against a team in a row, or sometimes you play them like 1 week and then you play them the next. Has he done those kind of quick turnarounds where it's a different game plan going in for the next opponent?
Yeah, I think that you see Mark often change it up. I mean, this is a guy who plays 11 to 13 guys a game in the regular season. He is always willing to try something, to make adjustments and find the advantage. And it's a reason why this Thunder team, the last 2 seasons, as they found success, they've been a fantastic third quarter team, a fantastic second half team, and are able to mount these comebacks. This, while having 57 wins, they also have the most double-digit point comebacks in games because they're able to, the team and the coaching staff is able to see something and quickly on the fly adjust to it, much less when there's 2 days in between games, as there are littered throughout this entire series. And on that note, Chet Holmgren with rest has been phenomenal. With 2 days off this season, he's averaged 19 and 9 in the regular season. So I think that'll be a big boost as well for a rookie who played all 82 games and is still kind of getting used to the NBA. And so I think that with Mark, you're going to see some tricks up his sleeve. He's been one of the best coaches in challenges. He's been able to mix and match the rotation and kind of learn on the fly. And I think they'll do the same thing in this series.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to kind of see, especially with like a bunch of breaks, as you mentioned, right? This is really where that kind of chess match with the coaches comes into play here. And we've seen Willie Green do a pretty good job of coming up with the right defensive game plan, offensive game plan too, and making some adjustments, maybe not as much as Pelicans fans would like, but you've definitely seen that too. And I'm going to be curious to see as this series progresses, what changes for each and every team here. So I have it listed on the side here, X factors, difference makers. I want to lead with this. Shai is second in the league in terms of free throw attempts this season. How much of a factor do you think something like that is going to play into this series?
Yeah, I think that'll be a big factor. I think that it's going to be different, obviously, than what we've ever seen before. He doesn't have that sort of level of experience, but I think it's going to be something to monitor very closely. It could go good or bad. I'd imagine it's going to go good for the Thunder, but it's still something that you have to see happen.
Yeah, New Orleans has done a good job overall because you have guys like Herb Jones and Dyson Daniels there of not fouling some of those players. I know Pelicans fans probably think differently here, but they rank right around the top 10 in terms of like not allowing fouls, not allowing free throws per game and things like that. Having Herb Jones and Dyson to throw at Shai basically all game, right? Every minute he's on the court, it's either going to be Herb Jones, just being one of the premier defenders in the NBA, as you mentioned, but you also have Dyson Daniels, who has really good length there. And a lot of people think is either a better defender individually than Herb is already, or could be too. I think if you can kind of press that point of attack and give him kind of all of that for this series, it might limit some of the foul calls that he gets. But also if you can just press it and force a couple of turnovers, New Orleans definitely needs to do that. Easier said than done, because we talked about that earlier in the show here, how for such a young team, they're really good at taking care of the ball. But that's going to be such an interesting matchup to watch. Shai versus Herb versus Dyson the entirety of every game this series is how I'm assuming it's going to go.
Yeah, it'll be a great matchup to watch. I think that it goes back to their very last game that they played with each other, and you hit on it. It's going to be the fouls, because in that last matchup, Shai struggled out of the gate a little bit. J-Dub had it going, so the Thunder just changed their rotational pattern. Typically, they play Shai all of the first quarter, all of the third quarter, and then close the second and fourth quarters with him. But in that game, Shai started slow. J-Dub was the hot hand, and they knew Herb Jones was one of the best defenders, so they put Shai. They took Shai out and let J-Dub have that first quarter, and then staggered him back in with Herb on the bench. And in that same time, Herb kind of gave away a couple of fouls on Isaiah Joe, swiping at the ball at the top of the key and jumping into Lou Dort's jump shot. Those are two fouls that come back costly and got him in foul trouble early and kind of kept him there, which in the playoffs, that stuff really matters. And I'm looking at that too from a Thunder standpoint of rookies in the playoffs, like a guy like Chet Holmgren, who has done a great job this year of not chasing blocks. But the lights get brighter, the games get more intense, and you start to just want to make a play. It's not going to come out of just pure like inexperience in the sense of like not being good enough, but just the want to go do the right thing and go make the big play for your team can sometimes lead to you being out of position, getting a block and getting a foul put on you and really putting yourself in foul trouble. So with Herb Jones and the defenders, they're going to have to do a good job of not wasting their fouls, so to say, on the offensive end or on the wrong players.
Yeah, you've seen Herb Jones do that a little bit, right? There's been a couple of just like sloppy fouls where he just swipes at someone who's bringing the ball up the court, right? And it's like, that isn't the time to do that sort of thing. And he's been in foul trouble a little bit recently, but I think you're seeing him realize, like, I need to kind of just tighten certain things up. I can't maybe be as aggressive as I want for a steal, and forcing a miss is just as good at that point. So then maybe they can still get out and run, because similar to the Thunder, they have a ton of guys that can just bring the ball up the court and they want to get out and run. They don't need to look for CJ McCollum, Brandon Ingram. Herb Jones is capable of doing it. Trey Murphy is capable of bringing the ball up the court too. Heck, even Jonas does it on occasion. Larry Nance Jr. So I think they play similar-ish styles, I think, at times offensively and defensively, which means this is going to be really intriguing to me and how this one's going to go. But certainly the foul calls, and if Shai can get to the line 8, 9, 10 times a game, that's going to be a big advantage, I think, for the Oklahoma City Thunder. So New Orleans is really going to need to be sound and solid on that side of the ball. What about a guy like Josh Giddey, who I think it was last game in the Smoothie King Center in New Orleans, kind of tormented the Pelicans with the open three-point shooting? I think part of their game plan is going to be like, let him shoot, right? Like if Giddey ends up with a couple of 30-point games because he went off from three, he's this season, I think, shooting 33.3%, right? 1 out of every 3. New Orleans is going to be content with that if you're looking at it kind of like process over results.
Yeah, Josh Giddey loves to play in New Orleans, loves to play the Pelicans. That's
so annoying, man.
He had 31 points in last year's playing game. Brandon Ingram mentioned in this post game yesterday that like Josh Giddey just loves playing the Pelicans. The Pelicans were in the midst of this season turnaround. Like Josh Giddey started the year so awful and kind of adapting to this new role. As a 21-year-old, his role changed for the 4th straight season, not only changing countries and teammates, and now his role of, you went from being the number 2 guy to the number 3 guy, and to at certain aspects, number 4 guy, with Chet Holmgren being an option to score offensively. And he's had to learn how to play off ball more. But since March 1st, Josh Giddey is averaging 15 points, 7 boards, 6 assists, and 1.2 stocks a game, which includes 54% from the floor, 37% from beyond the arc, and the most important part is 69% at the rim. If you can hit 69% of your shots at the rim with his body and his size, and 40% of your non-corner triples above the break, you're going to be in good shape. That's only been a stretch, though, since March 1st. Can you continue that? The Pelicans were on the wrong end of a huge three-point night from Josh Giddey. I will say, though, that has not been the only way he's found success. He did have a massive 4+ three-point night in Milwaukee and New Orleans back-to-back. But since then, it's been 1 3-pointer, 2 3-pointer, but dominating inside the arc and finding your stride in the mid-range and at the rim. I think that's going to be the key for Josh Giddey. Obviously, if he finds success from 3, that's going to be even better for him. But the caveat would be, like a game against Dallas, on TNT, Dallas had that same mindset of, we're going to put the center underneath the rim and just blatantly ignore Josh Giddey. And the Thunder were able to take him out of the game, even though he wasn't playing poorly individually. But as a team, you cannot have that happen. And so they were able to take him out of the game and put in guys like Cason Wallace, Aaron Wiggins, Kenrich Williams, and the list goes on of guys that can put in for him and adapt to that and make you stop playing that way and get you back to spacing a 5-out offense and kind of counter it. So it's going to be a big deal, because if Josh Giddey plays well, the Thunder will really be unbeatable in this series. But if he doesn't play well, it's not as though it's gonna kind of deter the Thunder in this series at all.
Yeah, it would force them to make some adjustments, which I think is at least a good thing, right? And all of a sudden they've got to go to kind of plan B, plan C, whatever it might be from the original game plan with everything. And, I think that New Orleans needs to defend this team kind of similar to what they did with Sacramento, right? Don't let Shai get into the paint. If you can limit that and turn them, look, and I understand that Oklahoma City Thunder can make their threes, but they don't do it on the highest volume in the league. Turn guys into jump shooters, and you just kind of live with it if they get going from 3 and they beat you that way, right? With the Sacramento Kings, it was, don't let De'Aaron Fox get into the paint and start spraying the ball around and kind of break your defense down that way. I think some of the same goes for Shai Gilgeous-Alexander as well, of try and limit him in that, turn him into a jump shooter. And New Orleans has done a very good job with some of that this season. And it might simply come down to these star players, right? What are you going to get from Brandon Ingram? What are you going to get from Shai Gilgeous-Alexander? It's going to be a fun series, though. You excited? You're coming to New Orleans too, right? For it?
I'll be there for games 3 and 4. I'm really excited about that. Really excited to see you in person, do some pods, do everything.
Oh yeah, we'll do everything here, man. Look, I love it. Everyone wants to come to New Orleans. I never have to leave, and I get to see everybody. I was telling you before the show, I've met something like 7 hosts in the past 2 months or something like that. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Make sure you are subscribed to Locked On Thunder if you're a Thunder fan, Locked On Pelicans if you're a Pelicans fan, on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast. This is the type of show you can only get on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. He is Rylan Stiles, host of Locked On Thunder at Rylan_Stiles. I'm Jake Madison, host of Locked On Pelicans at NOLA Jake. We appreciate y'all so much for listening. Enjoy the series. We'll have a lot more content here, maybe another crossover. Who knows, but it's going to be a fun one, and we'll see y'all next time.